Building Men is brought to you by Finish the Race Apparel, FTRapparel.com, the creators of all things building men, and by Become Stronger Industries, become-stronger.com, the creators of handmade steel maces, hammers, and other badass equipment. If you are a young man in middle or high school, or if you know a young man in middle or high school, you have to check out the Foundation, the new online community powered by Building Men. This group will meet once every 2 weeks, and we talk about such topics as accountability, authenticity, commitment, confidence, courage, curiosity, humility, integrity, leadership, respect, resiliency, and self-discipline. There are unbelievable guest mentors, guys that we've had on the Building Men podcast that join us for each meeting to give the young men pieces of advice and answer any questions they might have. We also have an online community, an app called Mighty Networks that we use, and this is where the young men have an opportunity to connect, to communicate, to hold each other accountable. And we put out weekly challenges for the young men, and those weekly challenges are geared around our 12 healthy habits, which are sleep, hydration, movement, sunlight, journaling, breathing, strength training, gratitude, nutrition, limiting screen time, reading, and intentional discomfort. So you have an opportunity to join the foundation. There is information in the show notes. Go to Building Men website at buildingmen.io and click on the foundation tab. Go one step further than you thought you could go. You're listening to the Building Men podcast with Dennis and Anthony Meralda, brothers on a mission
to help you become the strongest version of yourself, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, and physically.
What is up, everyone? Welcome back to the Building Men podcast. As always, I'm your host, Dennis Meralda. Today, I have a guest on the show. I found his page on Instagram a month or so ago, and as soon as I found it, I was like, I need to talk to this guy immediately. And few times on the show, there are a lot of the guests that I have on. They're famous in one aspect or another in their life, or they overcame a million different challenges. This guest is different in the I wanted him in my life when I was growing up. Like, I yearned for a man like this in my life, and my father was a part of my life. And those of you that have listened to the podcast, a lot of it was in a negative way. There's a lot of tough stories that I have about my own upbringing, my relationship with my own dad, and so my guest today, his name is Rob Kenney, and he runs his Instagram, his YouTube, his Facebook. It's Dad, how do I? Dad, how do I? ? And a lot of the things that we're going to talk about is just that. What piece of advice could you give to a young man? And we'll talk about his journey and unpack what he's going through. Rob, it's so good to see you here, man. Thanks for being.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on, Dennis. Appreciate it.
My pleasure, man. And so you start off your clips on Instagram, you start off with, "Hey kids, ... And you give a piece of advice, and it could be something really profound in nature. In nature, it could be words of wisdom. It could be, here's how you make a really good waffle, or it could be, hey, here's how you tie a tie or change a tie or things like that. And it really resonated with me, Rob, as I ran the Building Men program. I would teach the 7th graders how to tie a tie. I taught them how to change a tire. I taught them how to jump a car. And as a principal, I shouldn't have been out there in the parking lot having kids with jumper cables, but I was doing those things anyway. And so when I found your page, I was like, this is a man after my own heart. I love what you're doing. So where did it come from? I mean, I'll give the audience an opportunity to hear the backstory. Where did you decide to develop this program, Dad, how do I?
Yeah, so I thought of it a few years ago, and then it came to fruition during the pandemic because I ran out of excuses. My daughter kept on me, "Dad, you need to do this. I think it's something you need to do," and she just kept pestering me, and then I really ran out of excuses with the pandemic, and so that's when I did How to Tie a Tie. I think a big part of it, Dennis, is I think my backstory, because this thing has resonated on a completely different level that I didn't anticipate. I thought I was going to have 30 or 40 followers and kind of have this tight unit of people, learning how to do some things. I had no idea that it would blow up like it has. And I came up with the name Dad, How Do I? Because I I pictured one of my kids in the other room yelling, "Dad, how do I?" And then I come running and fix it, so that was where the name came from. But my backstory of, my dad left when I was 14. And so I have empathy for people that are going through not knowing how to do stuff that normally a dad should teach you. Not necessarily. I mean, there's a lot of people make comments on my channel that I have a dad, but he still has never shown me this stuff.
Right.
The dad's still around, but they just don't show the stuff that were needed. And I think there's a lot of stuff in school, unfortunately, that we learn that I never use again. I found, speaking from personal experience, but there was a lot of stuff I didn't know how to do. I was like, how come I wasn't taught that? I really needed some life skills to figure out how to do some things. I learned how to tie a tie from my roommate when I was 19. And in my video, I talk about the importance of paying attention to that knot. And that came from him. It's like you kind of building that knot as you're going. You don't want a big fat knot, because then it doesn't look right. It looks dorky is what I say in the video. But I think it's, all those little things. And it's resonated on a level I didn't anticipate. Like I said, there's people watching me tie a tie and crying. And, I thought I was just in my ignorance or my naivete. I thought I was just showing people how to tie a tie, but it's resonating on this level of maybe bringing up the hurt of never having a dad, or the frustration because you didn't know how to tie a tie, or all of the above. And so, yeah, so it's been hard to get my head around because I'm a bit of an introvert. And so it was a little tough at first. I've kind of hit my stride now. We're 3 years in, so I've had to kind of adjust and get used to it.
And you've been called the quote unquote internet dad. We talked about that at the beginning. You said, I don't have the ego to call myself that, but those are people out there have been calling you that. And when you talked about the tie and the tie piece, Rob, it was, to me, it's, there's the application of the lesson that you're doing, but what you do is you take that application and you make it so much deeper, which is why you get the emotional resonance from people. There was the book by Will Smith, it's called Will. I just got done listening to the audiobook of it, and I remember growing up in the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air years, and parents just don't understand, right? I remember that portion of it. But Will Smith tells a story about his dad. He had a tough, hard-ass dad, and he called him Daddy-O. And he said one of the beginning chapters of the book, Daddy-O was teaching him and his younger brother. He's like, they knocked down a wall in his shop. And he's like, you're going to build this wall. And it's a brick wall, right? And so the dad was like, listen, you have to brick by brick. This is what you do. And he talked to him about the mortar and how you lay the bricks and this and that. And Will was bitching about it. He's like, there's no way I'm going to be able to do this wall. It's like an insurmountable object. I can never get done with it. And the dad shows him a brick. He's like, all you need to focus on is this one brick. He's like, can you lay this one brick the right way? And Will's like, yeah, I could do that. He's like, then lay this one brick the right way and just keep doing it. Lay the next brick the right way and the next brick. And you can't look at the big picture. It's like, what can I do in this one moment? And it made me think of the tie and the tie piece, because there's these little tiny things that you need to do as you're tying it. If you're just thinking about looking fresh with the tie, you're going to miss the picture. It's the little lessons that go along with it. So when you look back on your upbringing, Rob, and you mentioned your dad had left when you were 14 years old. So now you're going into high school age range. Who did you look to teach you those things? Was there that guy that was teaching how to lay a brick, or did you just find it from all different sources?
I have to give credit to my brother. So when my dad, so I'm one of 8 kids and I'm number 7, and our family kind of started to unravel when I was about 12. And so there was a period of time where we were even, my mom wasn't able to take care of us. My dad got custody of us, but he was kind of he's going through a midlife crisis, so to speak. And so he came home when I was 14 and said he's just done raising kids. And he said the older kids are going to have to take in the younger kids. Wow. Or they're going to foster care. That's how hard my dad's heart had become at the time. And so thankfully, my brother Rick, who was 9 years older than me at the time, he's 23. I'm 14, he's 23. At the time, he seemed a lot older. 23-year-old's a kid too, yeah, right? Yeah. So I give him a lot of credit, and so to top it off, he was a newlywed. So he got married he got married in October, and I moved in with them in January. So they hardly even had a honeymoon, and then I'm moving in suddenly they have a 14-year-old kid that hasn't had a whole lot of instruction. I didn't have a whole lot of discipline because we were kind of fending for ourselves, doing the best we could. Like, I've shared before with other people that, my dad would have been in big trouble, with CPS and stuff, because he would load us up with groceries and be gone for a week. And we would just kind of go to school because that was the thing to do, but I even learned how to forge his signature so that in case I was sick, I could actually write my own note, so yeah. And so anyway, all that to say that my brother Rick, has definitely taught me a lot of stuff. He's a journeyman cabinet maker. He's since retired. So I learned a lot of stuff around, and I just honestly like to hang around with them because it was comforting to be able to kind of, put together stuff, even though he was kind of learning at the time certain things because he wasn't a journeyman cabinet maker at the time. He was learning himself. And so, yeah, so I just enjoyed his company. I really felt like I'm so thankful for him. And to this day, he's still, he's a role model for me in a lot of areas. There's certain things that, and he'd even admit this, he's not great at tying a tie. And he's not great, not necessarily the sharpest dresser.
Right.
And so I learned other things from other people.
So with Rick at that time, as he's taking you in, I mean, all the credit in the world. I think back to being a 23-year-old, I don't think I was able to take care of myself at that time. I was a total disaster. And think about your older brother taking care of you, newlywed, and 23 years old getting married. Now, at the time, that was like more of the norm,
Right.
but now it's not, right? When he was going through and, taking you under his wing, so to speak, would he say to you, all right, Rob, here's the deal. Like, here's what we're going to do. Let me show you how to do it. Let's talk about it. Or was it more of you just watching him do things and starting and learning almost by osmosis through that?
Yeah, kind of watching him. I think he went into the Army for a few years, so I think he learned some discipline while he was in the military. And then so when he got out, and then shortly after that was when he got married, and then so here's another thing. We ended up they had bought a trailer, so they had an 8-foot by 35-foot trailer. I always called it a mobile home, but it was a trailer, 8 by 35-foot trailer. And they ended up, my brother Rick built a shelf and put a bed on it, and that was my room at the back of the trailer. And so you'd have to walk through their room to get to my room. None of them were rooms. It was a trailer, so we had a little eating area in the front. And so on top of the fact that they were 23, his wife was 24, and they were newlyweds, we were in tight quarters, right? So again, as I look back and go, wow, that was quite the sacrifice that they made for me.
Right. And think about just the lessons in sacrificing for family there. You mentioned, Rob, that Rick went into the military, and that's where he learned discipline. It's one of those things where you mentioned there were so many things in school that you didn't learn. And me being a former middle school principal, one of the reasons why I left public education beyond the standardizing of kids, and I was just so done with that. A lot of the things that kids needed to learn, there was no spot in the curriculum for how to do these things. And you've taken up this mantra of like, I will help you learn these things that you're not learning in school. So you mentioned Rick learned discipline as he was a part of the armed forces. What are certain things that if my son is going to be 18 on Saturday when we're recording this episode, he'll be 18 this Saturday. What are certain lessons that more pillars or character traits that kids need to come out of high school with, discipline being one of them? We need to learn self-discipline. What are a couple other that they need to learn?
Yeah, I think, how to treat people with respect. There's certain things that if you say you're going to do something, I guess that maybe that's part of discipline. But if you say you're going to do something, you need to do it. And I think being on time, that it's funny because that was emphasized to me so much by him about being on time. And yet now I'm like, Rick, you're coming over at noon. It's 12:30. Where are you? So at the time when I was a kid, he really, really emphasized it in my brain to where now I get a little antsy if I'm late to something. But it was like, Rick, you said you're going to be here at noon. But anyway, I digress. But that really, I think that's so important in getting back to people. You set an expectation. And so honestly, it's kind of a pet peeve for me. If you set an expectation of, hey, I'm going to be there Tuesday at 10. If something changes, you need to communicate that. You can't just show up at 11 or just not show up or whatever. I think it's those little things, I think, that add up to big things, because then as you prove that you say you're going to do something, it's tied to your word. And I think your word and your name are important to hang on to. You need you're establishing this reputation, so to speak, where you say you're going to do something, you should do it.
I love that. It's one of the lessons that I'm teaching my own children right now. And I'm having them take the words should, probably, might, maybe out of their vocabulary if they're talking about anything like that. For example, I say to my son, can you pick up your sister from softball practice today? And he goes, I should be able to.
Mm.
And I'm like, now he knows, like, now we've gone through it a couple different times. I'm like, can I count on you to be there for your sister? It's a yes or a no. Like, can I count on you when we get off of this call? I know death taxes, you will be there to pick up your sister from practice. And now he's gotten to the point where he's removed that soft language away from it, because again, and I do think it's generational. Like, I do think there's this, like, little ambiguity and commitment, but it's a big piece of it. Like, if you say you're going to do something, you do it. If you say you're going to show up, you show up. And then, like, the time piece. It's funny, Rob, I still do workshops with teachers in some respects, and I do the game Would You Rather. And one of the questions I like to ask is, would you rather always be 20 minutes early or always be 10 minutes late? And it is staggering the number of people would rather be 10 minutes late. And I'm like, how is that even possible? How do you even it should be a slam dunk. There should be no question there whatsoever. Yeah. So Rob, take us back to now your with what you're doing right now, and you're sitting across from 14-year-old Rob, who has this situation at home with his father just leaving groceries and then going away for weeks at a time or whatever it is. And you're like, I need something in my life. If you can go back and have a conversation with 14-year-old Rob, what did you need to hear from a father figure in your life at that time that would have made a big difference to you?
Yeah, I'm closing in on 60, so I'll be 59 this year. And so I've had a chance to have the ups and downs of life, I think. And I think a big part, and I try to share this with people on my channel whenever I can, is the temporariness of things. I think that's was a big thing. When I was 14 and I was struggling, understanding that this will pass. I'll be 18, and then I was 25, and then I was married and into my 30s, and then I have kids. And I think just understanding that I'm not going to be a 14-year-old kid that seems helpless or doesn't have a whole lot of direction. I can kind of choose to make better choices myself, when I get the opportunity. And I've shared that before about being a 14-year-old. Kind of when my dad did that was painful. That's a painful rejection where plus you're going through puberty, and so you're wondering who you are, and suddenly girls are amazing, right? And you wonder, what's going on with me? I got all these new feelings that I didn't have before. And to not have somebody, my brother, Rick tried to, but I didn't feel comfortable sharing that kind of stuff with my brother. I mean, maybe people don't feel comfortable sharing that with their dad, but I've tried to, with my own kids, they're out of the house now. My son's 27, he'll be 28. And I tried to walk alongside him to help him understand I was a 14-year-old boy too, and I think it's just the reassurance that, this is normal. I know that it might seem weird to you, but it is this is what people go through, and it's part of becoming a man. And I think understanding that, would have been really helpful. Understanding again that it was temporary. This is a temporary situation that you look back on and go, yeah, he was right. So.
Absolutely. And in parenting your own children, do you recall having the moments where you did things super intentionally, where you're like, okay, my kid is now 5 years old. It's now time for them to ride a bike without training wheels. Okay, now they're 7. It's going to be, or was it more, all right, let's see how it happens. So, we'll go along with it. If something comes up, it's a lesson. Or were you like, this is the lesson that I need to teach my kids. Let me do it really intentionally.
Yeah, I think I was intentional as far as when stuff came up, more so. I don't think I set standards that this is when they should do it necessarily. But what I mean by that is I had to build a fence when we moved, and I share this in my book. And I didn't know how to build a fence. I didn't know, and I'd never done it before. I'd, again, learned some stuff from my brother Rick, but it's a little bit scary to go out and build a fence with your neighbor seeing the progress.
Right.
And what if this thing turns out like it's who knows, like it's on display for all to see what a buffoon I am, so it was a little scary. But part of that was it was an opportunity to teach my kids how to build a fence too while I was learning. It would have been a lot easier and a lot quicker for me to just go out and build the fence, figure it out. And instead I slowed it down and had my kids involved in building the fence. So my daughter was putting the screws in even though she was, at that time, she was probably 8 and Kyle was 5, I think. They were just little kids, but I wanted to build that camaraderie where we're doing stuff together. It isn't, I'm just going to go out and do that and you play on your Game Boy. I never wanted that. And I had to push back on that. I remember one specific time with my son, I came in, and it was interesting because I was working on something else, and the neighbor, and I had asked my son to come out and help me, and I'll be there in a little bit. And he didn't come out. And so I kind of let him. And then the neighbor kid actually came over and he hung out with me.
Oh,
hey, Mr.
yeah.
Kenney, do you need some help? And so he's out there, helping me. And then I came in and I told that story to my son, and he felt pretty horrible about the fact that the neighbor kid stepped in and he was working with me.
And that's one of those lessons. You don't have to pull him aside and say, son, this is what happened. He saw it and he felt what was going on. I just recently saw something where they were talking about with your kids, like lessons that you could teach your kids. And one of them was, so say your kid has to clean their room on Tuesdays and Saturdays. Like that's just part of your family dynamics. It's one of their chores. And the guy says, don't give your kids warning. So now it's Tuesday night. The kid doesn't have his room cleaned. You're not going to give them a warning. Well, if you don't have this done by such and such a time, they know what the expectation is. It needs to be done Tuesdays and Saturdays. Say the kid doesn't have it done. So the guy in the video, I wish I could give him credit here. He said, all right, so the kid doesn't do it. He goes, here's what you do. You take his allowance money and you pay his younger sister to go clean his room. The room is cleaned up. And now he's like, what the hell just happened here? I'm like, my little sister got the money for it. The feeling that he's going to have associated with that process, you don't need to yell and scream. It'll be a life lesson by seeing that happen. Pretty much what happened there. You could have been like, get out here, Junior. You need to do this right now. No, you kept going with what you're doing. And I bet you he was out there the next time helping you put the fence up.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it worked really good. And kind of to your point that you just said too, I think consequences are a big thing. I think, understanding that you have a choice here. That's one of the ways we raised our kids. I got to give my wife credit too. We're on the same team, and it's a big part of how we raised our kids. But I think, consequence, giving them, okay, these are the choices that you have before you. If you make this choice, which is what we're wanting to encourage, then this happens. But if you make the choice to do this is what happens. You clearly know the choices before you. Should you choose to do that, you come back to me and that's not fair. Well, I clearly laid out the consequences for you. You made the choice. You're going to have to suffer the consequences.
Right.
And I think, and as they get older, as now that you have an 18-year-old, as you kind of let the chain out a little bit longer, let the line out a little bit longer to where, okay, you've proven that you could handle this responsibility. I'm going to give you a little bit more. How you handle that depends on, we'll decide whether you get even more, or, I got to pull the rope back here. You're kind of getting away from what we talked about. I think that's pretty important when you're raising kids.
The choice and consequence play right there. right? Because kids need to have their voice a part of the space. They need to feel as though they're heard, that their opinions matter, insofar as they're along for the ride with what you and your partner are doing, or you and your wife are doing. Um, but the consequence is a big thing. As a principal, consequences were a part of the learning process. If and I would have conversations with parents quite frequently, more frequently than any other conversation was, let your kids suffer the consequences for their lack of effort or for whatever behavior was a part of this situation. So if there was a bad behavior, there's a consequence for it. If they don't do the work, the consequence is a failing grade. Don't come in and solve the problem for them. Let the kids figure out what that's like. So what's your stance with parents right now when they're like, how do I deal with behaviors with my kids, or how do I handle consequences for my kids?
Yeah, that's tough. I've kind of steered clear of some of the more difficult things because it's hard to paint with a broad brush, and I'm talking to thousands of people. It's a little bit hard to paint with a broad brush because everybody's situation is a little bit different. And boy, if I miss one little thing, it's
Right.
amazing how people point it out. So that's a little bit difficult, but yeah, to what I said about consequences, I think that's so important, and I think it is really bad. This what do they call it? Helicopter parenting or whatever,
Yeah.
where they're swooping in and solving the problems. Boy, one thing I've always tried to share is we're trying to raise good adults. You're not raising good kids, you're raising good adults so that they can be, go off on their own and do their own thing. And I've shared the story of my daughter getting married. My daughter got married young. She got married at 21. She'll be 31 this year. Great guy, it's all good. But and when she got married, they were here for a year, and then they wanted to move to Tennessee. We're in Seattle, so they wanted to move all the way to Tennessee. And I encouraged them, even though that was hard. Yeah, I think it was really good for them to go out. You guys go, you're married, go establish yourself. You're away from us. You're away from the other in-laws. You guys get to have your own little thing. Doesn't mean I didn't cry when they left, when they're pulling their U-Haul to Tennessee, but it was good for them. And that was an adult decision, go do that. And then a few years ago, my son ended up moving to Virginia. He's out in Virginia. He's working for Amazon now out there. And again, same thing. When he moved out there, it came with tears, but I felt like we did well. He's not living in our basement. Neither of our kids are living in our basement. They're off the payroll. We don't pay for their cell phone. We don't pay for anything. And yet I see parents who maybe have that helicopter mentality where they're almost doing it to themselves, to where the kids are still relying on them when they're in their 30s and even in their 40s. Like
Oh yeah.
what are you doing? You're kind of making that choice yourself.
It's like Freud calls it the devouring mother. It's that mom, and it could be mom or dad. It's typically the female role that wants to keep the kid reliant on them as the nurturing force in their life, and it's stifling the kid. It's not letting them develop, especially for young men, into their true masculine selves. And I see my role as a father as what I want to do is set my kids up to where when they get to that point, they don't need me for anything. Hopefully they're still going to call me and contact me and want to share their stories, their adventures, their struggles, their wins, but I don't want them to need me for anything. I want them to have all those lessons, which is what you're doing right now. You're basically setting the stage for, if you're able to just look at what you're doing, and kids were able to consume this, they have all those things in place. But it probably came with a lot of trials and tribulations, ups and downs, highs and lows. So if you were to share with us one example of a parenting high, like, okay, this was my moment where I'm standing in the center of the ring, I just knocked out the Russian, like this is my moment in the sun as a parent. And then what was your moment of like you messed up and you needed to go back and change things up a little bit? You just had that low as a parent. Building men of character, integrity, strength, compassion, and empathy through transformational mentoring, coaching, and motivational speaking is our mission here at Building Men. To work with me as a one-on-one life coach, you can find information in the show notes, or you can visit our website at buildingmen.io, where you can book a free 30-minute discovery call to help you become the strongest version of yourself mentally, spiritually, emotionally, and physically. Now, back to the show.
Yeah, I think for a little bit of a lesson here, I learned this when I was forced to be an umpire. Part of being a little league coach was they made us volunteer to be an umpire, I think, so you could teach them about umpiring, so that you understood that it's not easy,
Right.
And so
Right.
the coach would have a little more empathy towards the umpire. So, and I remember being an umpire and making a call before I knew before I had all the angles, and then it was like, and then I looked stupid. I'm out there in front of everybody, and I'm playing. I'm like an infield. I wasn't behind the plate, but I made an out call, and the guy had dropped the ball or whatever. But I think all that to say, I think that's a good picture of, you might want to slow it down, because I've learned the hard way. Maybe I didn't have all the facts before I laid down the punishment, and I specifically remember that with my daughter, a specific moment when she was little, and I was a little too quick to punish her, I think, for something she did. So that still sticks with me to this day, and she still remembers it.
Wow.
So it's unfortunate, but I think a big part that I've tried to share with people too is asking for forgiveness of your kids. I think a lot of people think that that's a weakness, but I think it's important to get ahead of it, because if you pretend you got it all together and you don't screw up, you're kidding yourself, and your kids are going to find out eventually that you don't you don't have it all together. And so I think it's good to be transparent about that. I don't mean to act like you're apologize for everything, but I think there's certain times where you do mess up. It's good for them to hear that, hey, I'm sorry, I did this, I didn't handle this correctly. And I think it humanizes you, and it helps because I think again, if you try to keep that charade going of that you've got it all together, I think they will actually lose respect for you, because you don't. The reality is you don't. You're doing your best, of course,
Yes.
and I think it's good. But I honestly think that it's important to come back and ask for forgiveness. And then if you're going to say, what do I feel the big moments were? Again, I think seeing the kids being, you're on your own. We did well. As hard as that is, it's hard. It's, my daughter's out in New York, my son's in Virginia. Way to go, Rob. But I think I'd like to spend more time with them. I talk to them pretty much every day, and we have a great relationship with them. But so I understand it. People wanting to kind of keep that dependence a little bit. But I think it's unfair to your kids, because you had the opportunity, hopefully, to go out and do your own thing. I wanted to give them the opportunity to go out and be the people they wanted to be.
And here's the thing too, and I appreciate you saying that about showing the vulnerability, showing the weakness. We don't have everything right. There's going to be moments where you're acting out of a place of emotion, especially when you're disciplining your kids. When there's something that comes up and you're charged up and you say something you shouldn't say, or you fly off the handle, to be able to take a deep breath and come back. Hey, listen, kid, like, I was a little bit upset. Let's talk about it. We've had a couple beats to chill a little bit. Let's come back at it. And then it also shows them, one, you're you are a human being that will make mistakes, but also, like, how do you handle a situation where you might be in the wrong? Again, like you're saying, not every single time. You don't have to say every time I'm wrong, but in those
Right.
moments, hey, listen, let's talk about this. I made a mistake here. Here's what I learned from it. Here was my intent. I had a situation like that with my daughter recently, where I came at it from my situation in my childhood, and I had to take a step back and say, listen, I'm sorry the way that I reacted. This was my advice based on my situation, but I trust you. I trust your decision-making process here, and I support you in whatever direction you want to go. My daughter was like, that was more impactful than anything you could have said otherwise, because now I recognize, like, you believe in me, and like, now it's my chance to either succeed or fail based on my own decisions there. So as you went through this process, and you were talking about the dad, how do I started during the COVID time frame, where it went from you had all these thoughts, these ideas, and all of a sudden it came to fruition. When you first got going, did you make a list of everything you needed to know, or is it kind of like you wake up in the morning and you're like, something happens, you're like, oh, I wonder if my kids know that they should clean the toaster out once a year or whatever it is.
Yeah, I have a general idea of some things that I just wanted to be able to share. And a big part of it, too, I was trying to make my videos concise, too, where you will get in and learn your thing and then move on, because I think, unfortunately, we're trapped. We get in the rabbit hole. I think we all do, of social media and what have you. And next thing you know, 2 hours have gone by. I want to encourage people to get outside and live, too. And so that was a big thing. I wanted to pass along nuggets that I'd learned, but not make you have to earn the nugget, suppose, so to speak. Like you have to watch a 20-minute video to get the 10-second nugget you needed. I was trying to get you in and out. But also, I have come to realize that, because I've had people say this on my channel, like when I've done some cooking, cooking does take a little bit of time. And so I try to cut out some of the stuff, but I also try to show my mistakes, because that's how you learn, when you cook. And I think part of it too is hanging out with people. I think I've always shared this too, that quantity time comes, or quality time comes from quantity time. It's true. I think there was a time where people were trying to substitute, but as long as you're getting quality time, well, but I think quality time kind of happens when you're just hanging out. That's why I like to go fishing. There might not be a word spoken for a half an hour, but we're hanging out together and just kind of enjoying nature and hanging out. And so I do understand that piece, that I think that's also important. So I do want to keep that going too, where we are kind of hanging out as well as a dad figure. I think that's important.
Absolutely. Rob, you mentioned you use the term earn the nugget when, as far as like how long the duration of the clip is for you to give that piece of advice, that wisdom, the lesson. Is there a part of it that kids need the earning the nugget, where we need those lessons? They need to be a little bit more like, listen, you have to roll up your sleeves here and go through the muck, go through the sucking of whatever it's going to be to earn whatever the lesson is on the other side. Can you pick out anything like that where the kids have to earn whatever that lesson is?
Yeah, no, I think there's definitely some of that too, for sure. And I always say, you don't know what you don't know. I love that saying, because I can tell you 100 times how to do something or what have you, but it kind of falls on deaf ears because they aren't really there. And I remember that. I remember using that quite a bit when my son went off to college. He was 5 hours away, and then getting phone calls like, what do I do here? Well, I've shown you that before, but and then it sticks with them, because again, like you said, they're in the middle of it and they're trying to figure it out. It means something to them, because they don't know what they don't know until then they need to know it. And then it's like, okay, now it sticks, because I had to learn the hard way that I didn't know what I was doing, even though I know my dad showed me this.
Right. Yeah. It says, in those moments, it's like the I do, we do, you do approach, right? So like, watch me do it, then we're going to do it together. Now you do it. It's those where the kids don't really recognize they're going to need this on their own one day. They're going to need to like be able to retrieve that from their memory banks. So as you create this content, one of the things you do, these Wisdom Wednesdays that come out, is there a one or two that you would say is these were your favorites, or these were ones that really resonate with you? Like, I'm really glad I did that one. I got a lot of positive feedback, or me, it was a personal thing that I liked that I did this one.
Yeah. So the one I just did yesterday, I think I feel pretty good about. You talked about pruning away the dead flowers. Yep. I think that there's, it's one of those simple life lessons that, and I think a lot of people hang on to a lot of stuff. And one of the things I try to share is forgiveness on my channel, because I think that that's so important, and how I forgave my own dad, and so there's a hint of that with that particular video, where I'm kind of saying, you gotta, it was good for a time, and then it's kind of, now it's taken life away. And I think that there's some truth to that. I think we all tend to, if you haven't forgiven, or even you're forgiven yourself, I've shared that. I think it's the importance of being able to move on, because the past, you can learn from the past, but it's just not beneficial as far as hanging on to the hurt. And then that saying, I always love to say it, because if people haven't heard it, they need to hear it, that unforgiveness is like drinking poison and hoping the other person is somehow and you're the one drinking the poison, and that other person's completely forgotten that they ever did that to you. So all that to say, I like that one. I also did one on how to or never wrestle with a pig. I always thought that was a good one, because and people said, well, there's times where you got to stand up for yourself. Yeah, that's true. But you also got to recognize when that person is a pig and they just want to wrestle, and you're not getting anywhere. It's just a wrestling match and they enjoy it. I don't need that, but I think it is important to have a backbone and stand up for yourself. I wasn't trying to imply that, but yeah. So I liked that because I think it was a subtle burn. I thought.
It's so funny, Rob. I told you, I don't script. I wrote down one quote that you said: "Never wrestle with a pig. You both get dirty, and the pig likes it." George Bernard Shaw, right? Like that. It's so funny. That's the one that you brought up of all the things. Like that resonated with me, that one that you put out there. And that was a recent one as well. But the cool thing that you're doing is you're taking a life lesson. So something tangible that the kids are doing. But then you're also, like you mentioned, pruning away the dead flowers, right? It's something like, okay, it's important to do this because the trees, the flowers won't bloom the same way, but also in your life.
Right.
And so you're taking things like, why is it important to slow down when you're tying a tie? Why is it important to make your bed every day? Like those things like that, because when you make your bed, it starts off your day in a certain way. It's like, a promise to yourself that you're keeping. So it's approachable, but it's a larger life lesson that people can take and remember back every single time that they're doing something like that.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope to, and for a time when we first started my channel, because I say we, because my daughter helped me a lot, and we were doing static posts on Wednesday with just a quote that meant something to me. But I thought, I think I can squeeze it into roughly a minute. Got a minute and a half on Instagram for a reel, and I thought, I think it'd be better to actually have not only the quote, but then a little bit of, elaborate a little bit on it or tie it into something, why it means something to me. And I'll be honest with you, Dennis, a lot of these are for me. They're like, I'm kind of giving you an inside peek into the fact that these things have helped me because it helped me. Because, you can always learn from, and I share this too, because people were like, oh, I don't like so-and-so because he did this. And it's like, I ended up doing a video talking about, if we're only looking for quotes from perfect people, there'd be no quotes, so be careful with saying, and I even talked about, I've known people in my life that I wouldn't want to emulate how they live, but they said something profound. I think I can take that profound thing and kind of, and hang on to that nugget, so to speak, where it's like that's pretty smart what that person said, even though I wouldn't necessarily point you to, hey, that's how you want to live your life, how this person's living their life.
100% agree with that. And the way that you do it too, with a cup of coffee in your hand, you have that look of someone I want to sit down and be like, hey, can you show me how to do this or that? It's a very approachable way about you. And it's what you all said also resonated with me, Rob, in that when I started the podcast, I thought, I'm doing this podcast to help young men and or their parents that are struggling with something in their life. So I could go on and talk for 15 minutes or an hour or whatever. And what I recognize is every single one of the initial podcasts where I was talking to me. I was telling myself things that I needed to hear when I was a young man that I didn't hear, that I needed someone to tell me. And I'm like, I might as well tell myself right now. It took a lot for me to come to that. So I appreciate that. Rob, before I give you an opportunity to share with the audience where they can find you, how they get in touch with you, I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate what you're doing. It's so needed. And things like this, as we try to reform the way education is going, it's those daily things, those habits, those little life things that can happen, and also character traits that we can help young men especially put into their life. So if I'm listening to this episode right now, say I'm an 18-year-old kid, and there's one thing that I can do once I hit pause listening to this episode, there's one thing right now that I can do. By doing this one thing, it could really change the course of my life. What's one thing I could do right now?
I think this speaks well to our society. We're such a victim society, I think you need to not play the victim. I think that's such a big part. I think so many people have gotten used to, well, I'm not doing this because of that. I'm not doing this because of that. And this person hurt me, and that's why. Well, you know what? The sooner you can take responsibility for your life and go, this is my life. And there's a Switchfoot song that I love that says, this is your life. Are you who you want to be? You have the choice to go, I'm no longer going to play the victim, and I'm going to be who I want to be, and I'm not going to make excuses anymore. I think that that's when you become a man. Honestly, I think when you finally quit blaming other people for why you're in the situation that you are, you take responsibility for it, and it's freeing, forgiving and letting go of the past. It's freeing. I've shared that, that was something I didn't anticipate when I finally forgave my dad. Boy, there was freedom for me on the other side. Suddenly I didn't carry this thing. Used to be that commercial where the guy had a car, I think, above his head or something, because he was always thinking about this car that he wanted. And I think in my case, thinking about my dad and wanting some sort of payment for what he did was weighing on me. It was on my brain. I'm making decisions, but I got to keep that plate spinning. It's occupying energy, and that's kind of the point of cutting off the dead, flower. You're expending energy in a non-productive way. Take responsibility for yourself and make what you can of your own life.
That's a good one. And it's like, you want to meet the person responsible for all the shit you're going through in your life. Go look in the mirror and go meet that person, because he's also responsible for every single good thing that's in your future. You just have to believe in his ability to do so.
Boy, and it feels good.
It really does. It's a freeing thing when you stop playing the victim. It really, it's tough initially, but then it's very freeing. So Rob, where can the Building Men audience find you? How do we get in touch with you?
Yeah. So I got all kinds of, speaking of plate spinning, I have my Dad How Do I YouTube channel. That's kind of the main thing that started everything. So it's just Dad How Do I on YouTube. And then I'm on Instagram, Dad How Do I. I'm on Facebook, Dad How Do I. And then I'm on TikTok as well. That's something I put off for the longest time because I think it's shortening our attention span. But I thought I should be there as a wholesome, safe place that people maybe can find me. So I'm at the real Dad How Do I, because there are people imitating me on claiming to be me, unfortunately. So, and then I also do have a podcast as well, that with my nephew, and then there's questions. We try to open that up as a place where people can actually ask specific questions, and then we try to deal with them. You can email me at dadpodqs@gmail.com, and we welcome questions, because I think that's important, being able to dig a little bit deeper with certain things that I can answer specifically to the best of my ability. I am a dad, I'm not I'm a jack of all trades, master of none. I don't have a degree in psychology or anything. I've just been a dad and gone through it. Now I'm on the other side, just trying to share some wisdom.
And if somebody told you 3 years ago, Rob, that you would have to create a real Dad How Do I, because there'd be imposters coming and trying to steal your thunder, you'd feel like you're crazy. There's no way that I'm going to have like people trying to emulate my social media channels. It's absolutely tremendous.
Yeah, it's a form of flattery, I guess, but still disappointing. And I have people, I have this one knucklehead, or I don't know if maybe it's a group, but I'll post something on Facebook, and then suddenly somebody's in the comments claiming to be me and wanting that people to reach out to them, and they're using my logo. It's just so disappointing. I'm like, can you just carve your own path? Do you have to try to scam people? What is going on? So.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a wild world out there. Well, every single day you're doing something that's making it a little more palatable for young men, a little bit easier for them. So really appreciate this. It was an honor to have an opportunity to interview you today, Rob. For the Building Men audience, go one step further than you thought you could go. We'll see you next time on Building Men.